The biting winter wind stung Vivian Johnson's tear-streaked face as she trudged through knee-deep snow. The small traveling trunk clutched in her frozen fingers, growing heavier with each desperate step. Her parents' final words echoed in her mind, cutting deeper than the February cold of 1876. "If you refuse to marry Bartholomew Langley, then you are no daughter of ours." The snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the Montana wilderness in pristine white that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now it threatened to become Vivian's winding sheet. At 20 years old, she had never been alone, never traveled more than 10 miles from her family's homestead, and certainly never imagined being cast out with nothing but a trunk containing a spare dress, her mother's old Bible, and barely enough food for 2 days. She had always been the obedient daughter, helping her mother with household chores, assisting her father with the farm accounts, and caring for her younger siblings. Until Bartholomew Langley, the wealthiest cattle rancher in the territory and 30 years her senior, had asked for her hand in marriage. Her parents had been ecstatic. Vivian had been horrified. "I cannot marry a man I do not love," she had told them, her voice surprisingly steady despite her trembling hands. "Especially not one who has buried 3 wives already." Her father's face had turned crimson. "You ungrateful child! Do you know what this marriage would mean for our family? For your brothers and sisters? Langley has offered to pay off our debts and set us up with prime grazing land." Her mother had been more tactical, appealing to Vivian's sense of duty. "Think of your siblings, Vivian. Think of their future." But Vivian had stood her ground, even when her father had given her an ultimatum: marry Langley or leave their home forever. She hadn't truly believed he would follow through with his threat. Not until this morning, when he had thrown her trunk out onto the snow-covered porch and told her to get out. Now, as darkness began to fall and the temperature plummeted further, Vivian realized the terrible mistake she had made. Her determination to chart her own course might well cost her life. The small town of Silver Creek was still miles away, and she was losing feeling in her toes and fingers. A gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet, and the trunk slipped from her grasp, tumbling into a snowdrift. Vivian fell to her knees, her tears freezing on her cheeks as she struggled to retrieve it. Her woolen coat, once her pride and joy, now seemed as effective as tissue paper against the brutal cold. "I will not die here," she whispered through chattering teeth, though the wind swallowed her words. "I will not give them the satisfaction." The soft glow of firelight in the distance caught her attention, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Vivian squinted through the falling snow, trying to determine its source. It seemed to be coming from a small cabin tucked among the pines. She hadn't known anyone lived out this way, but right now, she didn't care if it was home to outlaws or ghosts. Anything was better than freezing to death in the wilderness. Gathering what remained of her strength, Vivian hauled herself to her feet, grabbed her trunk, and stumbled toward the light. Every step was agony, her frozen feet barely responding to her commands. The snow had soaked through her boots hours ago, and her dress hung heavy and wet beneath her coat. As she neared the cabin, she could make out a small stable off to one side, where a horse whinnied softly. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. Vivian's heart pounded with relief and apprehension. What kind of reception would she receive? A young woman alone, seeking shelter from strangers. She was still 20 yards from the door when her strength finally gave out. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she pitched forward into the snow, the trunk landing beside her with a muffled thud. Vivian tried to call out, but her voice emerged as little more than a hoarse whisper. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the cabin door swinging open, spilling golden light onto the snow, and a tall silhouette moving quickly toward her. The first sensation Vivian registered upon waking was warmth glorious, enveloping warmth that seeped into her bones. The second was the crackling of a fire nearby. The third was the realization that she was not alone. "Don't try to move just yet," a deep voice advised from somewhere to her right. "You were half frozen when I found you." Vivian's eyes fluttered open to find herself lying on a narrow cot draped with thick furs, positioned close to a stone fireplace where flames danced merrily. A man sat in a rough-hewn chair nearby, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, watching her with concerned gray eyes. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and though he was dressed simply in a flannel shirt and worn denim trousers, there was something in his bearing that suggested he was not a simple homesteader. "Where am I?" Vivian managed, her voice barely audible. "My cabin," he replied, rising to pour water from a kettle into a tin cup. "About 15 miles east of Silver Creek. I'm Ross O'Malley." He approached and carefully helped her sit up enough to drink. "And you're lucky to be alive, Miss Johnson," she supplied, after taking a sip of the blessedly warm water. "Vivian Johnson. Well, Miss Johnson, would you care to explain what you were doing wandering alone in a blizzard? These mountains are no place for anyone to be out in such weather, least of all a young woman." The events of the day crashed back over Vivian with such force that tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face away, embarrassed by her display of emotion. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to impose on your hospitality. I was trying to reach Silver Creek." Ross O'Malley's expression softened slightly. "That's a long way to travel on foot in this weather. Where did you come from?" "The Johnson homestead, about 10 miles west of here." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Thomas Johnson's place? You're his daughter?" Vivian nodded, then added bitterly, "Though he's made it quite clear I'm no longer welcome there." Ross frowned, clearly waiting for her to elaborate, but when she remained silent, he didn't press. Instead, he moved to a small stove in the corner of the cabin's main room and stirred something in a pot that filled the air with a savory aroma. "You need to eat," he said, ladling stew into a bowl, "and then you need to rest. Whatever troubles brought you here can wait until you've recovered your strength." As he handed her the bowl, their fingers brushed, and Vivian noticed calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. Not a rancher's hands, though. There was something different about them. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley," she said softly, accepting the food. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Let's start with you staying alive, Miss Johnson. That'll be payment enough for now." As Vivian ate the hearty venison stew, she took stock of her surroundings. The cabin was small but surprisingly comfortable, with pelts adorning the walls and a collection of books stacked neatly on a shelf. A rifle hung above the door, and various tools of a trapper's trade were organized in one corner. What caught her attention most, however, was a battered leather saddle with silver conchos displayed prominently near the door, the kind favored by cowboys who worked the big cattle drives. "You're a cowboy?" she asked, gesturing toward the saddle. Ross followed her gaze and chuckled. "Used to be. Rode with the XY outfit for 7 years, pushing longhorns up from Texas. Now I mostly trap and hunt, trade with the Blackfeet sometimes." He paused, studying her. "Your feet were nearly frostbitten. I took the liberty of removing your boots and warming them properly. I hope you don't find that too forward." Vivian blushed but shook her head. "No, thank you. I wasn't thinking clearly when I left home. I should have been better prepared." "Few people are prepared to be thrown out of their homes," Ross observed quietly. She looked up sharply. "How did you—" "Your trunk is packed like someone leaving in a hurry, not like someone planning a journey," he explained. "And Thomas Johnson isn't known for his gentle temperament. I've heard stories in town." Vivian set aside her empty bowl, suddenly feeling exhausted. "My father wanted me to marry Bartholomew Langley. I refused." Ross's eyebrows shot up. "Langley, the cattle baron? He must be 50 years old and widowed 3 times over," Vivian finished for him. "Yes. My father saw it as an advantageous match. I saw it as a death sentence." "So they cast you out," Ross concluded, his voice hardening. "In the dead of winter." "They said I could return when I came to my senses," Vivian admitted, a fresh wave of hurt washing over her. "As if refusing to sell myself for my father's debts was madness." Ross was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but resolute. "You can stay here until the weather clears. Then I'll take you to Silver Creek, help you find work and lodging." "I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," he cut her off. "It's the decent thing to do, and out here, decency is sometimes all that stands between survival and ruin." With those words, he stood and moved to a chest at the foot of the cabin's only other bed. He pulled out a thick woolen blanket and added it to the furs covering Vivian. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to decide what comes next." As Vivian drifted into exhausted sleep, warmed by the fire Ross O'Malley had built and the kindness he had shown, she couldn't help but wonder about this solitary cowboy turned trapper who lived alone in the wilderness, and why, despite everything, she felt safer with this stranger than she ever had beneath her father's roof. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Vivian woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood outside the cabin. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was and how she had come to be there. Then the memories flooded back, and with them came a crushing wave of despair. She was alone in the world now. No family, no home, no prospects. What would become of her? The cabin door swung open, and Ross entered, his arms laden with firewood. A blast of cold air accompanied him, making Vivian pull the furs closer around herself. "Good morning," he said, kicking the door shut behind him. "How are you feeling?" Vivian sat up cautiously, taking stock of her body. Her feet and hands tingled unpleasantly, but the numbness was gone. "Better, I think. Still tired." Ross nodded, depositing the wood in a box beside the fireplace. "That's to be expected. You pushed yourself hard yesterday." He straightened and regarded her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Are you hungry?" As if in answer, Vivian's stomach growled audibly, bringing a flush to her cheeks. Ross's mouth quirked in a half-smile as he moved to the stove and began preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and dried apple slices. "Your trunk is by the door," he said as he worked. "I brought it in last night after you fell asleep. Thought you might want to change of clothes." "Thank you," Vivian said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. The idea of clean, dry clothes was immensely appealing. "Mr. O'Malley?" Ross?" he interrupted, glancing over his shoulder. "Just Ross is fine." "Ross?" she amended. "I'm truly grateful for everything you've done. Not many men would have taken in a stranger the way you did." He shrugged, his broad shoulders moving beneath his flannel shirt. "Like I said, out here we look out for each other. Or we should anyway." He spooned the mush into 2 bowls and brought one to her. "The weather's clear today, but the snow's deep. It'll be a few days before we can safely make the journey to Silver Creek." Vivian accepted the bowl with murmured thanks. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he assured her, settling into his chair with his own breakfast. "Truth be told, it's nice having someone to talk to. Gets lonely up here, especially in winter." "How long have you lived here?" Vivian asked, curious about this man who had saved her life. Ross considered the question as he ate. "Built this place 3 years ago, after I quit the cowboy life. Needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could—" He trailed off, then finished simply, "Somewhere I could think." There was a story there, Vivian sensed, but she didn't press. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional cry of a bird outside. "What will you do in Silver Creek?" Ross asked eventually. Vivian stared into her empty bowl. "I don't know. Find work, I suppose. I can read and write better than most. Perhaps I could assist the school teacher or work in a shop." "Not many opportunities for a young woman alone," Ross observed, his tone neutral. "People talk in small towns." "I know," Vivian sighed. "But what choice do I have?" Ross didn't answer immediately. He took their bowls to a wash basin and began cleaning them. "You could go to Helena or Butte," he suggested. "Bigger towns, more opportunities." "And how would I get there?" "I have barely enough money for a week's lodging, let alone passage on a stagecoach." Ross's back was to her as he dried the dishes. "We'll figure something out." There it was again, that casual assumption of responsibility for her welfare. Vivian wasn't sure whether to be grateful or alarmed. She had been raised to be wary of a man's motives, especially when he offered assistance too readily. "I'll get your trunk," Ross said, changing the subject. "You can change while I check my trap lines. I won't be gone more than an hour." After he had deposited her trunk beside the cot and left the cabin, Vivian rose on unsteady legs. Her dress from yesterday was hanging near the fire, mostly dry but hopelessly wrinkled. She opened her trunk and surveyed its meager contents. One spare dress of serviceable brown wool, undergarments, a nightgown, the Bible, a small leather pouch containing her mother's pearl earrings, smuggled out against her father's wishes, and a few personal items. She changed quickly, grateful for the clean clothes, and was just attempting to tame her tangled auburn hair when Ross returned, bringing with him the sharp scent of pine and cold air. "Caught a couple of rabbits," he announced, holding up his prize. "Should make a good stew for—" He stopped short when he saw her standing by the fire, hair cascading in waves down her back, the simple dress emphasizing her slender figure. "You look—" he began, then cleared his throat. "You look better, more color in your cheeks." Vivian felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you. I feel more human now." Ross nodded and busied himself with preparing the rabbits for cooking. Vivian watched him work, noting the sure, efficient movements of his hands as he skinned and jointed the animals. There was nothing wasteful or excessive about him, she realized. Every action had purpose. "Can I help?" she offered, wanting to be useful. Ross glanced up, seeming surprised by the offer. "You know how to cook?" "Of course," Vivian replied, slightly offended. "I've been helping in our kitchen since I was tall enough to reach the stove." A genuine smile broke across Ross's face, transforming his stern features. "Well then, by all means, the vegetables are in that sack by the door, potatoes, carrots, and an onion or two, if we're lucky." They worked together preparing the stew, and Vivian found herself relaxing in his presence. Ross wasn't much for idle chatter, but when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often tinged with dry humor. "How did you learn to read and write so well?" he asked as they chopped vegetables side by side. Not many frontier families prioritize education, especially for daughters. "My mother," Vivian explained. "She was a school teacher back east before she married my father. She taught all of us children, though my brothers had less patience for it than I did." "And your father allowed it?" "He saw the practical benefits. I kept the farm accounts, wrote letters to suppliers, that sort of thing." Vivian's knife faltered as she remembered her father's last words to her. "He used to be proud of me, I think, before—" Ross set down his knife and turned to face her. "Your father is a fool," he said quietly, "throwing away his daughter for a business arrangement with a man like Langley." Vivian looked up, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "You know Bartholomew Langley?" A shadow crossed Ross's face. "I know of him. Worked for one of his competitors years back. Langley has a reputation for being ruthless in business and demanding in his personal life." "Demanding?" Ross hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Let's just say his wives haven't had easy lives. The rumors about the third one." He stopped himself. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't speak ill of your intended." "He is not my intended," Vivian said firmly. "I would sooner die than marry that man." "Well, you nearly did," Ross pointed out, a hint of a smile returning. "Let's try to avoid such drastic measures in the future, shall we?" Vivian couldn't help but smile back. "I'll do my best." As the stew simmered over the fire, filling the cabin with delicious aromas, Ross pulled a deck of cards from a shelf. "Do you play casino?" he asked. Vivian nodded. "My brothers taught me." They sat at the small table, and Ross dealt the cards with practiced ease. Vivian hadn't played in years, but the rules came back to her quickly. She won the first round, much to Ross's evident surprise. "You're full of surprises, Miss Johnson," he commented as he shuffled for the next game. "Vivian," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Ross, then you should call me Vivian." He nodded, dealing the cards. "Vivian it is." They played until the stew was ready, talking easily about inconsequential things. Vivian learned that Ross had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith, and had headed west after the war looking for adventure. He'd found it driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail, living rough, facing storms and rustlers and river crossings gone wrong. "Why did you give it up?" Vivian asked as they ate the savory stew. "The cowboy life?" Ross's expression closed off slightly. "Lost my taste for it after Blackwater Creek." "What happened there?" He was silent for so long that Vivian thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. Cattle baron named Mercer decided he wanted exclusive grazing rights to Blackwater Valley. The problem was, 3 smaller ranches had been using those pastures for years. When they refused to clear out, Mercer hired guns. Bad business all around? Were you involved? Ross stared into the fire. I was riding for one of the small outfits, the Triple R. Good people, fair wages. When Mercer's men came, they didn't just threaten, they burned the Triple R to the ground. Killed the owner, Richard Ramsey, and his oldest son. That's terrible, Vivian whispered, horrified. It was, Ross agreed grimly. And it got worse. The other small ranchers organized, brought in their own guns. For 6 weeks it was open warfare in that valley. 27 men died before the army finally intervened. And you? I fought alongside the Triple R boys until it was over. Then I took my pay and rode north, looking for somewhere quieter. His gray eyes met hers across the table. I'd seen enough killing to last a lifetime. The raw honesty in his voice moved Vivian deeply. This man who had rescued her, who was sheltering her without expectation of reward, had seen the darkest side of frontier life and chosen solitude over violence. It made his kindness to her all the more meaningful. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Ross nodded once, then rose and began clearing away their meal things. The mood had grown somber, and Vivian cast about for a way to lighten it. "You mentioned having books," she said, gesturing toward the shelf she had noticed earlier. "May I look at them?" Ross's expression brightened slightly. "Help yourself. Not much of a library, but it keeps me occupied during the long winter nights." Vivian crossed to the shelf and examined the titles. Several dime novels about Western adventures, which made her smile, a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans, a book of Tennyson's poetry, a practical guide to wilderness survival, and, surprisingly, Jane Eyre. She picked up the last one, raising an eyebrow at Ross. "Charlotte Bronte? I wouldn't have expected that." To her delight, a flush crept up Ross's neck. "Traded with a widow heading back east last summer. She insisted it was worth 3 rabbit pelts." He shrugged. Turns out she was right. Vivian laughed, a genuine laugh that seemed to startle them both. "You're full of surprises yourself, Mr. O'Malley." As the day waned and evening approached, the tension that had briefly risen between them dissipated. They settled into a comfortable routine, as if they had known each other for years rather than hours. Ross taught Vivian how to play chess, using a set he had carved himself, the pieces rough but recognizable. In return, she entertained him with stories of her siblings' antics, carefully avoiding any mention of her parents. When night fell, Ross insisted on taking the floor by the fire, giving Vivian his bed. She protested, but he was adamant. "I've slept on the ground from Texas to Montana," he assured her. "One night on my own floor won't kill me." Vivian relented, too exhausted to argue further. As she drifted toward sleep, listening to the soft sounds of Ross banking the fire for the night, she realized that for the first time since leaving her family's home, she felt safe. More than that, she felt seen in a way she never had before. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, with snow glittering in the moonlight outside the small window, Vivian Johnson allowed herself to acknowledge a surprising truth. She was beginning to care for the solitary cowboy who had lit a fire at her side when the rest of the world had left her in the cold. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt both novel and strangely familiar to Vivian. She and Ross shared the work of the cabin, cooking, cleaning, tending the fire. He taught her how to identify animal tracks in the snow, how to set a simple snare for rabbits, and how to tell when a storm was brewing by the way the pine trees swayed. In return, Vivian mended Ross's shirts, which were in dire need of attention, and reorganized his meager pantry stores in a more sensible fashion. She read aloud from Jane Eyre in the evenings, amused by Ross's genuine interest in the story. "Rochester reminds me of my father," she commented one night as she closed the book. "Arrogant, secretive, convinced he knows best." Ross, whittling a piece of wood by the fire, looked up. "Does that make you Jane?" Vivian considered this. Perhaps in some ways, she's determined to make her own way in the world, unwilling to compromise her principles. "She also falls in love with a difficult man," Ross observed casually. Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Well, the comparison isn't perfect." Ross's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, before returning to his carving. No comparison ever is. On the fourth day, as they were finishing breakfast, Ross announced that the trails would likely be passable the following morning. "If you still want to go to Silver Creek," he added, watching her carefully. Vivian set down her cup with a small thud. The prospect of leaving the safety of the cabin filled her with unexpected dread. Yes, of course. I can't impose on your hospitality forever." Ross frowned slightly. "It's not an imposition." "Even so," Vivian insisted, "I need to find work, establish myself. I can't hide away in the mountains indefinitely." "Is that what you think you're doing? Hiding?" The question struck uncomfortably close to the truth. Part of Vivian, a larger part than she cared to admit, wanted nothing more than to remain in this secluded cabin with Ross, safe from her father's anger and Langley's ambitions. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted softly. "I only know what I can't do, which is return home and agree to marry a man I despise." Ross set aside his carving and leaned forward. "I've been thinking about your situation. I have a proposition for you." Vivian tensed instinctively. Propositions from men rarely benefited women in her experience. Seeing her reaction, Ross quickly added, "Not that kind of proposition. I'm suggesting a business arrangement." "What sort of business arrangement?" Vivian asked cautiously. "I trade regularly with Silver Creek and sometimes with the Blackfeet. I've been thinking of expanding to Helena, maybe setting up a more formal trading post. What I lack is someone who can keep proper books, handle correspondence, negotiate with merchants." He met her eyes directly. "Someone like you." Vivian blinked in surprise. "You want me to be your clerk?" "Partner," Ross corrected her. "You have skills I don't. I have resources you need. It would be a fair exchange. But I don't know anything about trapping or trading. You can learn. You've picked up more in 4 days than most people would in a month." He gestured around the cabin. "And it's clear you have a gift for organization that I sorely lack." Vivian's mind raced with the possibilities. It was an unexpected offer, but not an unwelcome one. Still, there were practical considerations. Where would I live? What would people say? An unmarried woman living alone with a man, even in a business capacity. Ross nodded, acknowledging the problem. "I've thought of that. There's a small cabin about half a mile from here, belonged to an old trapper who passed on last winter. It needs work, but it could be made comfortable. You'd have your own place, but close enough that we could work together easily." Vivian was touched by how much thought he had clearly given the matter. "You've been planning this." "Considering it," Ross amended. "The decision is yours. If you'd rather try your luck in Silver Creek, I'll take you there tomorrow, as promised." Vivian rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. The idea of starting a new life in an unfamiliar town, alone and virtually penniless, had been filling her with quiet dread. Ross's offer presented an alternative that was both practical and appealing, and if she were honest with herself, the prospect of remaining near him was not the least of its attractions. "I would want to be a true partner," she said, turning back to face him. "With a fair share of the profits and an equal say in business decisions." Ross's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. And I would need to establish myself properly in the community. Visit Silver Creek regularly, perhaps attend church there. I won't live as a recluse." "Understandable." Vivian took a deep breath. "Then I accept your proposition, Mr. O'Malley. Partners." Ross stood and extended his hand. When Vivian placed her smaller one in it, his grip was warm and firm. "Partners, Miss Johnson." The moment stretched between them, their hands remaining clasped a beat longer than necessary. Vivian felt that strange flutter in her stomach again, stronger this time. Ross was the first to break the contact, clearing his throat. "Well then, we should visit the other cabin tomorrow, see what repairs are needed." Vivian nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. "Yes, that sounds sensible." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since she had awakened in his cabin days before. The change in their relationship, from rescuer and rescued to business partners, had shifted something fundamental between them. Ross picked up his rifle from its place near the door. "I should check the trap lines. We're running low on meat." "I'll tidy up here," Vivian offered, grateful for the distraction. After Ross left, Vivian sank into a chair, her thoughts in turmoil. What was she doing? Agreeing to live alone in the wilderness, to go into business with a man she had known less than a week? It was madness by any conventional standard, and yet something deep within her recognized that this opportunity offered what she had always craved: independence, respect, and the chance to build something of her own. The fact that it would be with Ross O'Malley, a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and consideration, only made the prospect more appealing. Vivian moved to her trunk and opened it, taking out her mother's Bible. She traced the worn leather cover with her fingertips, remembering how her mother had read from it each night, finding comfort in its familiar verses. "What would you think of me now, Mother?" she whispered. "Making my own way, defying Father's wishes, living in the wilderness with a former cowboy?" She could almost hear her mother's practical voice. "The Lord helps those who help themselves, Vivian, and He often works in mysterious ways." Smiling at the imagined response, Vivian returned the Bible to her trunk and set about cleaning the cabin with renewed purpose. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she had made her choice. For better or worse, her future was now tied to Ross O'Malley's. When Ross returned hours later, cheeks ruddy from the cold and a brace of rabbits in hand, Vivian had transformed the cabin. The floor was swept, the dishes washed and neatly stacked, his scattered tools organized by type and size. She had even attempted to arrange his books in alphabetical order, though she had stopped when she realized he might have had his own system. Ross stood in the doorway, surveying the changes with an expression of mingled surprise and amusement. "Should I wipe my boots?" he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Vivian laughed. "It might be a good habit to develop, partner." The awkwardness from earlier had dissipated, replaced by a comfortable camaraderie as they prepared the evening meal together. Vivian found herself watching Ross covertly as he worked, noting the grace in his movements despite his large frame, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands as he demonstrated how to properly joint a rabbit. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. Vivian shook her head, embarrassed. "Nothing. Just thinking about our business arrangement. We should discuss the details." Ross nodded, returning to his task. "Good idea. After dinner, we'll work out the particulars." And so they did, sitting at the table with a piece of paper between them, listing assets, potential markets, and immediate needs. Ross had a surprising head for business despite his lack of formal education, and Vivian found herself impressed by his practical knowledge of the territory's economy. The Blackfeet need manufactured goods, needles, kettles, fabric, he explained. In exchange, they offer some of the finest furs and leatherwork you'll find anywhere. The problem is transport and communication. "Which is where I come in," Vivian surmised. "Managing inventory, correspondence, perhaps even learning their language?" Ross nodded approvingly. "Exactly. With a proper trading post and regular supply lines, we could build something substantial." "And this would all be legitimate? Above board?" Vivian asked, thinking of the whiskey traders who exploited the tribes with rot-gut alcohol. "Absolutely," Ross assured her. "I don't deal in whiskey or firearms, just fair trade for quality goods." Satisfied, Vivian continued making notes as they talked late into the evening, planning their future enterprise with growing excitement. When they finally retired for the night, Vivian to Ross's bed and Ross to his pallet by the fire, her mind was too full of possibilities to immediately find sleep. She lay awake, listening to Ross's steady breathing across the room, wondering at the strange path her life had taken. A week ago, she had been Thomas Johnson's dutiful daughter, facing a future as Bartholomew Langley's fourth wife. Now she was an independent woman, about to embark on a business venture with a former cowboy in the Montana wilderness. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a sense of rightness, as if she had finally found her true place in the world. When sleep finally claimed her, Vivian dreamed of wide-open spaces, of freedom, and of gray eyes that truly saw her for exactly who she was. Morning brought clear skies and milder temperatures, perfect for their expedition to the abandoned cabin. After a hearty breakfast, Ross packed a small bag with tools while Vivian wrapped bread and cheese for their midday meal. "It's about an hour's walk," Ross informed her as they prepared to leave. "The snow's still deep in places, so we'll take it slow." Vivian nodded, wrapping her now dry wool coat tightly around herself. Despite the sunshine, the February air remained bitterly cold. Ross had lent her a pair of thick woolen socks to wear over her own, making her boots snug but much warmer. They set out, following a narrow trail through the pines that Ross assured her would be barely discernible in summer, but was marked now by his own boot prints in the snow. Vivian marveled at the beauty of the forest in winter, the way sunlight glinted off icicles hanging from branches, the occasional flash of red as a cardinal darted between trees, the pristine white blanket covering everything. "It's beautiful," she remarked, pausing to catch her breath. "I never appreciated winter before." Ross, waiting patiently beside her, nodded. "Most people only see the hardship of it, the cold, the isolation, but there's beauty in every season if you look for it." "Is that why you chose to live out here? For the beauty?" "Partly," Ross admitted, "but mostly for the quiet. After years of cattle drives and range wars, the silence was healing." Vivian studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right temple. "You were wounded. At Blackwater Creek." It wasn't a question, but Ross nodded anyway. "Bullet grazed me. I was lucky. Others weren't." "You lost friends?" "Yes." The single word contained volumes of grief. Vivian reached out impulsively and squeezed his arm. "I'm sorry." Ross covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. It was a long time ago. They continued walking, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. Vivian found herself stealing glances at Ross, admiring the way he moved through the forest with easy confidence, always alert, always aware of his surroundings. "There it is," he said eventually, pointing ahead to a small clearing where a log cabin stood, half buried in snowdrifts. "Old Tom Mackenzie's place." As they approached, Vivian could see that the cabin was smaller than Ross's, but similarly constructed. The roof appeared sound, though snow had piled against the door and blocked the single window. Ross set to work clearing a path to the entrance, while Vivian examined the exterior. The logs were well fitted, the chinking between them mostly intact. A stone chimney rose from the rear of the structure, and a small lean-to on one side could serve as storage, or perhaps a workspace. "Seems solid enough," she observed. Ross grunted in agreement as he finally reached the door and pushed it open, revealing a dim interior. Tom was a good builder, simple but sturdy. They entered cautiously. The cabin consisted of a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with one chair, a narrow cot against the far wall, and a few shelves holding dusty tins and jars. A layer of dust covered everything, and cobwebs stretched from the rafters, but there was no sign of damage from weather or animals. "What happened to Mr. Mackenzie?" Vivian asked, running a finger along the table's surface and grimacing at the dust. "Pneumonia took him last December," Ross replied, checking the chimney for blockages. "He was nearly 70, lived alone for 30 years after his wife died in childbirth. No children, no relatives that anyone knew of." "How sad," Vivian murmured, trying to imagine living alone for 3 decades in this tiny cabin. "No one to mourn him." "The whole valley mourned him," Ross corrected her. "Tom was well liked, taught me most of what I know about trapping. He just preferred his own company to most others." Vivian walked the perimeter of the cabin, mentally cataloging what would be needed to make it habitable. "It's smaller than your place, but closer to the creek, which makes it better in summer, less distance to haul water." Ross pointed to a small cast-iron stove in the corner. "That's a decent cooking stove, better than mine. Tom traded for it just a year before he died." Vivian nodded, her practical mind already planning improvements. "The cot needs a new mattress, and curtains would make it cozier, perhaps a rug for the floor." Ross watched her with a bemused expression. "You're really considering this, aren't you? Living out here?" "Of course," Vivian replied, surprised by the question. "We agreed yesterday." "I know, but—" Ross gestured around the Spartan cabin. "This is a far cry from what you're used to. No neighbors for miles, no church socials or town gatherings. Just wilderness and hard work." Vivian crossed to stand before him, lifting her chin to meet his gaze directly. "Mr. O'Malley, do you think I'm some delicate flower who will wilt at the first sign of adversity? I grew up on a hardscrabble farm. I've helped birth calves in blizzards and harvested wheat in drought. I'm not afraid of hard work or solitude. Ross held up his hands in surrender, a smile tugging at his lips. I stand corrected, Miss Johnson. I didn't mean to imply you weren't capable. Good, Vivian said firmly, because I am. Very capable. They stared at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Vivian became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from Ross's body in the chilly cabin, of the way his eyes had darkened as he looked down at her. The moment was broken by a sudden gust of wind rattling the shutters. Ross stepped back, clearing his throat. We should check the roof from outside, make sure it's sound. Vivian nodded, her heart beating a little faster than normal. Yes, that would be prudent. They spent the next hour examining the cabin thoroughly, making note of repairs needed and supplies to be gathered. The list was substantial, but not overwhelming. New chinking between some of the logs, a thorough cleaning, replacement of a few broken window panes, new bedding, and basic furnishings. It's a good solid structure, Ross concluded as they finished their inspection. With a week's work, it could be quite comfortable. Vivian nodded in agreement, already envisioning how she would arrange her few possessions, where she might plant a small kitchen garden come spring. I like it, she declared. It feels right. Ross studied her face, as if searching for any sign of doubt or reservation. Finding none, he nodded once. Then it's settled. We'll start work tomorrow. They shared the bread and cheese outside, sitting on a fallen log that Ross cleared of snow. The winter sun was warm on their faces, and Vivian found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple meal and company more than any fancy dinner she could remember. Tell me about your family, Ross said suddenly. Your siblings, I mean. You mentioned them before. Vivian smiled, thinking of her brothers and sisters. There are 6 of us in all. I'm the oldest. Then come the twins. Samuel and Seth, they're 18 now. After them is Mary, who's 16 and fancies herself in love with the blacksmith's son. Then Robert, 14, who'd rather fish than do his chores. And finally little Emma, who's 10 and the smartest of us all. You miss them, Ross observed softly. Terribly, Vivian admitted, her smile fading. Especially Emma and Mary. We were close. I wonder if they understand why I left, or if Father has poisoned their minds against me. Children are often more perceptive than adults give them credit for, Ross said. They may understand better than you think. Perhaps. Vivian sighed, brushing crumbs from her skirt. What about you? Do you have family back in Missouri? Ross's expression closed slightly, but he answered. A sister, Caroline. She's married to a banker in St. Louis now. We write occasionally. No parents, both gone. Father died in '65, just after the war ended. Mother followed a year later. Some said of a broken heart, though I suspect it was more likely the consumption that had been troubling her for years. I'm sorry, Vivian said softly. Ross shrugged. It was a long time ago. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the forest sounds around them, the occasional crack of a branch heavy with snow, the distant call of a jay, the soft whispering of the wind through pine needles. We should head back, Ross said eventually, standing and offering Vivian his hand. The temperature drops quickly once the sun starts to set. Vivian accepted his assistance, noting how easily he pulled her to her feet, how naturally her hand fit in his. She released it quickly, feeling suddenly shy. Yes, of course. The walk back to Ross's cabin seemed shorter, perhaps because they were both lost in their own thoughts. Vivian found herself contemplating the strange turns her life had taken in the past week, how what had seemed like the end of everything had somehow become a beginning. As Ross's cabin came into view, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney, he had banked the fire carefully before they left. Vivian was struck by how much it already felt like home. Not her home, precisely, but a place of safety and comfort nonetheless. Penny for your thoughts, Ross said, breaking the silence. Vivian smiled. I was just thinking how quickly one's perception can change. A week ago, I would have seen this cabin as isolated, primitive, even a bit frightening. And now I see it as a sanctuary, a place of possibility. Ross's expression softened. That's a good way to look at it. As they reached the cabin door, he paused, hand on the latch, and turned to her. Vivian, I want you to know that I hope you don't feel... He stopped, seemingly frustrated with his inability to articulate whatever was on his mind. "What is it?" Vivian prompted gently. Ross took a deep breath. "I just want to be clear that our arrangement is strictly business. I don't want you to think I have expectations. Other expectations." Understanding dawned, and Vivian felt a curious mixture of relief and disappointment. "Of course," she said quickly. "I never thought otherwise." Ross nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "Good. That's good." He pushed open the door, and they entered the warmth of the cabin, each carefully maintaining a proper distance from the other, as if the acknowledgement of boundaries had created an invisible barrier between them. Vivian busied herself with rekindling the fire, while Ross removed his coat and boots. The easy companionship of earlier had been replaced by a subtle tension that neither seemed willing to address directly. As they prepared dinner together, moving around the small space with careful precision to avoid touching, Vivian wondered if she had imagined the connection she had felt growing between them. Perhaps Ross truly saw her only as a convenient business partner, someone with skills he could utilize. The thought shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. They ate in relative silence, the only conversation centered around practicalities, what supplies they would need from Silver Creek, when to begin work on the other cabin, how to establish their trading business. When it was time to retire for the night, Vivian found herself lingering by the fire, reluctant to end the evening on such a strained note. "Ross," she said finally, as he was banking the fire for the night, "I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for me, not just saving my life, but offering me a chance at independence, at building something worthwhile." He straightened, his face half in shadow. "You don't need to thank me. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Even so," Vivian persisted, "not many men would offer a woman equal partnership in a business venture. Not many would see value in what I can contribute." Ross was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was low and intent. "I see your value, Vivian, more clearly than perhaps you realize." The words hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Vivian's heart quickened, but before she could respond, Ross turned away. "We should get some rest," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." Vivian nodded, though he wasn't looking at her. "Yes, of course. Good night, Ross." "Good night, Vivian." As she lay in bed that night, listening to Ross's even breathing from his pallet by the fire, Vivian contemplated the complicated man who had rescued her from the storm. He was principled and kind, capable and intelligent. He had offered her a future when all seemed lost. And despite his protestations about their relationship being strictly business, Vivian couldn't help but wonder if there might someday be more between them. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. With these conflicting emotions swirling in her mind, Vivian finally drifted into sleep, dreaming of gray eyes that saw her value and strong hands that built fires in the darkness. The next week passed in a flurry of activity as Ross and Vivian divided their time between preparing for their trip to Silver Creek and beginning repairs on what they now referred to as Vivian's cabin. The work gave them a shared purpose that helped ease the awkwardness that had briefly arisen between them, and they soon fell back into a comfortable rhythm of cooperation. Ross proved to be a patient teacher, showing Vivian how to mix the clay-based chinking that would seal the gaps between logs, how to properly clean a chimney, and how to replace broken window glass. Vivian, in turn, demonstrated her skill with needle and thread, fashioning curtains from an old sheet Ross had never used, and repairing a tear in the thin mattress they had found stored in the cabin's lean-to. "You're good at this," Ross observed one afternoon, as he watched Vivian meticulously filling a gap in the cabin wall. "Most people would rush, but you take your time. Make sure it's done right." Vivian smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My father always said that anything worth doing is worth doing well." "Smart man," Ross commented, then added with a hint of bitterness, "In some ways, at least." Vivian paused in her work, studying Ross's profile, as he checked the fit of a repaired shutter. "You don't approve of him." It wasn't a question, but Ross answered anyway. "A man who would cast out his daughter for refusing to marry a man 3 times her age? No, I can't say I approve." "He was doing what he thought best for the family," Vivian said, surprising herself by defending her father. "The farm is struggling. Langley's offer would have secured all their futures." Ross turned to face her fully, his expression serious. At the cost of yours. Vivian couldn't argue with that simple truth. She returned to her chinking, working in silence for a moment before saying quietly, I wonder sometimes if they miss me, if they regret what happened. Ross set down his tools and crossed to where she knelt by the wall. He crouched beside her, his voice gentle. If they have any sense at all, they're missing you terribly. The sincerity in his gray eyes made Vivian's throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for saying that. Ross hesitated, then reached out and brushed a smudge of clay from her cheek, his touch feather light. It's only the truth. The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken feelings. Then Ross cleared his throat and stood, returning to his work on the shutters. We should finish up here. Storm's coming in tonight according to my knee, and we need to prepare for our trip to Silver Creek tomorrow. Vivian nodded, willing her racing heart to calm. Yes, of course. By late afternoon, dark clouds were indeed gathering on the horizon, and they hurried back to Ross's cabin, just as the first fat snowflakes began to fall. The evening was spent preparing for their journey, Ross cleaning and oiling his saddle and bridle, Vivian making a list of supplies they would need to purchase in town. We'll need to be careful, Ross warned as they worked. Langley owns a large share of the mercantile, and he has friends in Silver Creek. If word gets back to your father that you're in the area... Vivian's stomach clenched at the thought. Do you think he would try to force me to return home? Ross considered this. I don't know your father well enough to say, but Langley might see you as property he's been denied. Men like that don't take kindly to losing what they believe is theirs. I'm not his or anyone's property, Vivian said firmly. I know that, Ross assured her, but Langley might not see it that way. We'll need to be discreet, get our supplies, and conduct our business without drawing unnecessary attention. Vivian nodded, appreciating his concern. I'll be careful. As they prepared for bed, the storm outside intensified, wind howling around the cabin and snow pattering against the window. Ross added extra logs to the fire, ensuring it would burn through the night. Will we still be able to make it to Silver Creek tomorrow if the storm continues? Vivian asked as she settled onto Ross's bed. Should clear by morning, Ross replied, arranging his blankets on the floor. And I need to go regardless, running low on essentials, and I've got furs to trade. Vivian watched him move around the cabin, securing everything for the night, his movements efficient and sure. In just over a week, she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the quiet strength he emanated, to the way his rare smiles transformed his solemn face. Ross, she said suddenly, thank you. For everything. He paused in the act of banking the fire, glancing over at her. You've thanked me already, multiple times. I know. But I want to make sure you understand how much it all means to me. Not just saving my life, but giving me a purpose, a future. Ross straightened, his expression softening in the firelight. You're giving yourself a future, Vivian. I'm just providing a bit of land and some know-how. It's more than that, she insisted. You saw me, really saw me when my own family couldn't or wouldn't. You recognized what I could contribute, valued what I had to offer. Ross was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. What I saw was a woman of extraordinary courage and determination, someone who refused to be bartered away like cattle, who was willing to face death rather than surrender her principles. He paused, then added simply, How could I not value that? Vivian felt tears prick her eyes at the quiet admiration in his voice. Thank you, she whispered. Ross nodded once, then extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness, save for the glow of the fire. Good night, Vivian. Good night, Ross. As the storm raged outside and the fire crackled softly within, Vivian drifted toward sleep with Ross's words echoing in her mind. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and appreciated for who she was, not for what she could provide or represent. It was a heady feeling, one that filled her with both gratitude and a growing affection for the solitary man who had opened his home and his life to her. Morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night, leaving the world transformed into a glittering wonderland of pristine snow. After a quick breakfast, Ross brought his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Samson, from the small stable behind the cabin. "He's strong enough to carry us both," Ross explained as he saddled the animal. "It's about 10 miles to Silver Creek, and the trail will be clear enough in daylight." Vivian eyed the horse somewhat nervously. She had ridden before, of course, but usually just the gentle old mare her family kept for pulling the cart. "I haven't done much riding," she admitted. Ross smiled reassuringly. "Samson's as steady as they come. And you'll be riding in front of me so I can keep you secure." The thought of being held in Ross's arms for the journey sent a flutter through Vivian's stomach, but she nodded composedly. That sounds sensible. Once Samson was saddled and their packs secured, Ross helped Vivian mount, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. She was immediately enveloped in his warmth, his chest solid against her back, his arms creating a secure cage around her as he took up the reins. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Vivian nodded, not trusting her voice. The intimate proximity was both thrilling and unnerving, unlike anything she had experienced before. They set off at a walk, Samson picking his way carefully through the deep snow. As they traveled, Ross pointed out landmarks and tracks in the snow deer, rabbit, fox, teaching Vivian to read the wilderness around them. She listened attentively, grateful for the distraction from the awareness of his body pressed against hers. The journey passed more quickly than Vivian expected, filled with Ross's quiet commentary and the breathtaking beauty of the snow-covered landscape. By midday, they were approaching Silver Creek, a small but busy settlement nestled in a valley between rolling hills. "Remember," Ross murmured as the first buildings came into view, "we're just conducting business. Keep your head down, especially if we run into anyone from your father's circle." Vivian nodded, pulling her scarf higher around her face. "I understand." Silver Creek consisted of a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small church, a blacksmith shop, and various other businesses. People moved about their business despite the cold, and wagons and horses lined the street. To Vivian, who hadn't seen another human besides Ross in over a week, it seemed bustling with activity. Ross directed Samson to a hitching post outside the general store, then dismounted and helped Vivian down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met briefly before he stepped back. "Let's see to our supplies first," he suggested, his voice carefully neutral. "Then we can inquire about mail and any news." The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store, and Vivian was immediately enveloped in the familiar smells of coffee, tobacco, leather, and spices. An older man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter, his face breaking into a smile when he recognized Ross. "O'Malley, wondered when you'd make it down from your mountain. That was quite a storm last night." "Mr. Peterson," Ross greeted him with a nod. "Good to see you. We need to stock up on supplies." The shopkeeper's curious gaze shifted to Vivian, who kept her face partially concealed by her scarf. "And who might your companion be?" Ross's hand moved to the small of Vivian's back, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on her. "This is Miss Vivian Johnson, my new business partner. She'll be helping me expand my trading operations." Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Johnson, any relation to Thomas Johnson out by Elk Creek?" Vivian tensed, but Ross answered smoothly before she could speak. "No relation. Miss Johnson is from Helena originally." The lie rolled easily off his tongue, and Vivian was grateful for his quick thinking. She nodded in confirmation, not trusting herself to elaborate. "Well, welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Johnson," Peterson said, accepting the explanation without question. "What can I help you folks with today?" They spent the next hour selecting supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, ammunition for Ross's rifle, fabric and thread for Vivian's sewing projects, lamp oil, and various other necessities. Peterson chatted amiably as he filled their order, sharing the latest news and gossip from the territory. "Heard there was trouble up at the Langley Ranch," he mentioned casually as he measured out coffee beans. "Seems the old man's on the warpath about something. Fired 3 hands last week for no good reason anyone can figure." Vivian stiffened, and Ross's hand came to rest discreetly on her arm. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone deliberately casual. Peterson nodded, oblivious to their reaction. "Yep. Word is he was set to marry some young girl from one of the homesteads, but she disappeared. Langley's convinced she was spirited away by a rival rancher trying to ruin the match." "How interesting," Ross commented, his fingers tightening slightly on Vivian's arm. Any idea who this girl might be? Johnson's daughter, I believe. Thomas Johnson. Has that spread out past Elk Creek. Heard she went missing during that big storm a couple weeks back. Vivian swallowed hard, fighting to maintain her composure. So, her disappearance had become local gossip. And worse, Langley was angry enough to take it out on his ranch hands. Maybe she just ran off, Ross suggested. Not every young woman wants to marry a man old enough to be her grandfather. Peterson shrugged. Could be, though where she'd go in that weather is beyond me. Some folks are saying she probably froze to death out on the prairie. Shame if that's true. By all accounts, she was a pretty little thing, educated too. Vivian felt sick at the casual discussion of her presumed death. Ross must have sensed her distress, for he quickly changed the subject, asking about ammunition prices and the condition of the trail to Helena. When their supplies were packed and ready, Ross paid Peterson and gathered up their purchases. Anything come in for me? Letters or packages? Peterson checked a shelf behind the counter. Matter of fact, there is something. Came in on the stage last week. He produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. From St. Louis, looks like. Ross tucked the package into his coat. Much obliged. We'll be on our way now. Pleasure meeting you, Miss Johnson, Peterson called as they headed for the door. Hope to see you again soon. Vivian managed a polite nod before following Ross outside, her mind reeling from what they had learned. Once they were clear of the store, Ross guided her to a quiet alley between buildings. Are you all right? He asked, his voice low and concerned. Vivian nodded, though she felt far from all right. They think I'm dead, she whispered. My family thinks I died in the snow. Ross's expression was grim. Maybe that's for the best, for now at least. If they believe you're gone, they won't be looking for you. But my siblings, they must be heartbroken. I know it's hard, Ross said gently, but until we know more about your father's state of mind and Langley's intentions, it might be safer for you to remain, well, not exactly dead, but not publicly alive either. Vivian understood the logic, but the thought of her brothers and sisters grieving unnecessarily tore at her heart. I need to let them know I'm safe somehow. Ross considered this. Perhaps we could get a message to them discreetly. Not right away, but once things have settled. For now, though, we should finish our business and get back to the cabin before anyone recognizes you. They completed the rest of their errands, quickly visiting the blacksmith for horseshoe nails, stopping at the small office that served as both post office and telegraph station to send a message to Ross's trading contact in Helena, and purchasing fresh bread from the baker's wife. Throughout their travels around the small town, Vivian kept her scarf pulled high, her head down, acutely aware of the danger of being recognized. They were just loading the last of their supplies onto Samson when a voice called out from across the street. O'Malley, hold up there! Ross turned, his body subtly shifting to place himself between Vivian and the approaching figure, a tall man in a sheriff's badge. Sheriff Davis. What can I do for you? The sheriff, a weather-beaten man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed mustache, glanced curiously at Vivian before addressing Ross. Haven't seen you in town for a spell. Heard you might have information about that missing Johnson girl. Vivian's heart nearly stopped, but Ross's expression remained impassive. What makes you think that? Word gets around, Davis said vaguely. You trap up near Johnson's property, don't you? Thought you might have seen something during that big storm a few weeks back. Ross shook his head. Afraid not, Sheriff. I was holed up in my cabin the whole time. Nasty business, though. Hope the girl turns up safe. Davis's gaze shifted to Vivian again, his eyes narrowing slightly. And who might your companion be? Before Ross could answer, Vivian pulled down her scarf just enough to show her face, deciding that a partial truth would be more convincing than an outright lie. Vivian Jenkins, Sheriff, she said, changing her last name slightly. I'm Mr. O'Malley's new business partner. The sheriff studied her face. Jenkins, you say? Don't believe I've seen you around these parts before. Miss Jenkins is from Helena, Ross interjected smoothly. She's helping me establish trading connections there. Davis nodded slowly, clearly not entirely satisfied, but finding no reason to press further. Well, Miss Jenkins, welcome to Silver Creek. If you're partnering with O'Malley here, you've chosen well. He's one of the few honest traders in these mountains. "Thank you, Sheriff," Vivian replied, forcing a smile. "I believe I have." Davis touched the brim of his hat. "Well, I won't keep you folks. Weather's turning again. Might want to head out before it gets worse." He looked at Ross. "If you do hear anything about the Johnson girl, you'll let me know?" "Of course," Ross agreed readily. As the sheriff walked away, Vivian released a shaky breath. "That was close." Ross nodded grimly. "Too close. We should leave now." They mounted Samson quickly, Ross once again settling Vivian before him in the saddle. As they rode out of town, Vivian couldn't help glancing back, wondering if anyone was watching their departure, if anyone had recognized her despite her precautions. "Don't worry," Ross murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "If the sheriff suspected anything, he would have detained us for questioning. We're safe for now." Vivian nodded, leaning back slightly against Ross's solid presence. Despite the tension of their visit to town, she found comfort in his steadiness, his quick thinking, and the protective way he had positioned himself between her and potential danger throughout the day. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The afternoon was waning, the temperature dropping as the sun descended toward the horizon. Vivian was grateful for Ross's warmth at her back, for the secure circle of his arms as he guided Samson along the snow-covered trail. "What was in the package?" she asked eventually, remembering the parcel Peterson had given Ross. Ross shifted slightly behind her. "Book from my sister. She sends them, occasionally thinks I need civilizing influences out here in the wilderness." "What book?" "Don't know yet. Knowing Caroline, probably something improving. Last time it was Emerson's essays." Vivian smiled at the slight irritation in his tone. "You don't care for Emerson." "Too many words to say what could be said simply," Ross replied. "But Caroline means well. She worries about me being alone up here." "Well, you're not alone now," Vivian pointed out softly. Ross was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "No, I'm not." The simple acknowledgement warmed Vivian more than any fire could have. They continued toward home, for that was how she had come to think of Ross's cabin in the woods, with a comfortable silence between them, broken only by the soft crunch of Samson's hooves in the snow and the occasional call of a bird overhead. As the familiar outline of the cabin came into view, Vivian was struck by how glad she was to see it. In less than 2 weeks, this remote place had become more of a home to her than the house she had grown up in, and the man behind her, this quiet, principled former cowboy who had rescued her from the storm, had become someone she trusted implicitly, someone whose presence in her life felt increasingly essential. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it gave her a sense of belonging she had never quite experienced before. Terrifying because she had no idea if Ross felt the same way, or if to him, she was still just a business opportunity, a chance to expand his trading operations with her skills. As Ross helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, their eyes met briefly. Something in his gaze, a warmth, a hesitation made Vivian wonder if perhaps her feelings weren't as one-sided as she feared. But then, the moment passed, and they were busy unloading supplies and caring for Samson, their interactions returning to the comfortable partnership they had established. If there was something more growing between them, neither seemed quite ready to acknowledge it directly. That evening, as they sat by the fire sorting through their purchases, Ross opened the package from his sister. Inside was a copy of Middlemarch by George Eliot, along with a letter written in a flowing feminine hand. "Caroline says I should expand my literary horizons beyond dime novels and survival manuals," Ross read aloud, a hint of amusement in his voice. "She also wants to know if I've met any suitable young ladies in that wilderness you insist on calling home." Vivian looked up from the fabric she was examining. "Have you? Met suitable young ladies, I mean." Ross's eyes met hers across the fire. "Just one," he said quietly. The simple answer hung in the air between them, its implications too significant to be casually dismissed, too fragile to be directly addressed. Vivian felt her cheeks warm, and she returned her attention to the fabric, though her mind was far from thoughts of curtains and tablecloths. "Your sister sounds like a caring person," she commented, steering the conversation to safer ground. Ross nodded, tucking the letter back into the book. "She is stubborn as a mule and convinced she knows what's best for everyone, but caring nonetheless. "Will you tell her about me? About our business arrangement?" "I suppose I should," Ross mused, "though she's likely to get the wrong idea." "What idea would that be?" Ross hesitated, then admitted ruefully, "She's been trying to marry me off for years. Sends letters about eligible young women in St. Louis, suggests I visit more often. If I tell her I'm living in close proximity to a beautiful, intelligent woman my own age, she'll have us wed by summer in her mind." Vivian's heart skipped at his casual description of her as beautiful and intelligent. "We wouldn't want to give her false hopes," she said carefully. Ross studied her face for a long moment. "No," he agreed softly, "we wouldn't." But as their eyes held across the fire, Vivian wondered if such hopes would truly be false, or if they were simply admitting possibilities neither was quite ready to face. The days that followed their trip to Silver Creek fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent working on Vivian's cabin, which was rapidly becoming habitable. Afternoons, Ross taught Vivian the basics of his trading business, how to grade and price furs, which items were most in demand with the Blackfeet, how to keep proper accounts of their transactions. In the evenings, they shared cooking duties and read aloud from Ross's small library of books. To Vivian's surprise, Ross proved to have a fine reading voice, bringing characters to life with subtle changes in tone and pacing. He claimed to find Middlemarch tedious, but Vivian noticed that he never suggested they set it aside for something else. As February gave way to March, the weather began to moderate. Snow still covered the ground, but the days grew longer and occasionally warm enough to work outside without heavy coats. Vivian's cabin was nearly ready, the roof repaired, the chimney cleaned, the walls freshly chinked, and new glass installed in the broken window panes. Inside, it had been thoroughly scrubbed, furnished with the basics, and brightened with the curtains Vivian had sewn from fabric purchased in Silver Creek. "It looks like a proper home now," Ross observed one afternoon as they stood surveying their handiwork. "Hard to believe it's the same place we found a month ago." Vivian nodded, pride swelling in her chest. "It just needed some care and attention." Ross's eyes moved from the cabin to her face. "Many things improve with the right care and attention." The comment hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Such moments had been occurring with increasing frequency, casual remarks that seemed to carry deeper significance, glances that lingered a beat too long, accidental touches that sent warmth spiraling through Vivian's body. Yet neither of them had taken the step to acknowledge openly what was developing between them. Vivian wasn't sure if it was caution, uncertainty, or simply the comfort of their current arrangement that kept them from addressing the growing attraction. Whatever the reason, they maintained the fiction that they were merely business partners, even as every interaction seemed to contradict that claim. "When do you think I should move in?" Vivian asked, breaking the momentary tension. Ross considered the question. "The weather's still unpredictable. Might be best to wait another week or two until we're sure winter's loosening its grip." Vivian nodded, feeling an irrational relief at the delay. The thought of leaving the warmth and companionship of Ross's cabin for the solitude of her own was less appealing than she had expected it to be. That seemed sensible. As they walked back to Ross's cabin, a comfortable silence between them, Vivian found herself sneaking glances at his profile. The man who had rescued her from certain death had become the center of her new life, not just her business partner, but her teacher, her companion, and increasingly, the person whose good opinion mattered most to her. Was it merely gratitude she felt, admiration for his skills and principles, or was it something deeper, something that made her heart race when their hands accidentally touched, something that kept her awake at night wondering what it would be like if he kissed her? Vivian was so lost in these thoughts that she didn't notice the figure waiting on the porch of Ross's cabin until they were nearly upon it. A man sat on the rough-hewn bench, rifle across his knees, face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. Ross tensed beside her, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Stay behind me," he murmured. But before Vivian could comply, the man looked up, and she found herself staring into the familiar face of her brother Samuel. "Vivian," he breathed, rising to his feet. "My God, it is you." "Samuel," Vivian whispered, shock rendering her momentarily immobile. "How did you find me?" Samuel Johnson stepped forward, his expression a mixture of relief and wariness. "Followed your tracks that day, as far as I could before the snow covered them. Found signs you'd headed east. Been searching every few days since then, widening my circle." His eyes moved to Ross. "Heard in town there was a trapper living out this way. Thought it was worth checking?" Ross had relaxed his stance slightly but remained alert. "You're Thomas Johnson's son?" Samuel nodded, his gaze returning to Vivian. "Everyone thinks you're dead, Viv. Father told us you must have gotten lost in the storm, that we should give up hope." His voice hardened. "But I knew better. I knew you were too smart to just wander off to die." Vivian moved toward her brother, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Samuel, I've missed you all so much." Samuel embraced her briefly, then held her at arm's length, examining her. "You look well. Better than well." His eyes narrowed as he glanced at Ross. "Been taking good care of my sister, have you, mister?" "Ross O'Malley," Ross introduced himself, extending a hand which Samuel shook after a moment's hesitation. "And yes, I've been doing my best to ensure your sister's welfare." Samuel's expression remained guarded. "That's so? And what exactly is your interest in my sister's welfare?" "Samuel!" Vivian protested, embarrassed by his insinuation. Ross, however, remained calm. "Your sister and I have a business arrangement. She's helping me expand my trading operations with her accounting and correspondence skills. In exchange, I've provided her with shelter and a stake in the business." Samuel looked skeptical. "A business arrangement. With my sister." "Yes," Ross confirmed steadily. "Miss Johnson is an intelligent, capable woman with much to contribute. She's already improved my record-keeping systems considerably and helped establish connections with merchants in Helena." Vivian felt a rush of gratitude for Ross's matter-of-fact explanation, which presented her as a valued partner rather than a damsel in distress he had rescued. "It's true, Samuel," she added. "We're renovating a cabin nearby for me to live in." Ross has been a perfect gentleman. Samuel still looked unconvinced, but he nodded slowly. "If you say so, Viv." He glanced around. "Can we talk, privately?" Ross took the hint. "I'll see to Samson, give you two some time to catch up." He nodded to Samuel and headed toward the small stable behind the cabin. Once they were alone, Samuel turned to Vivian, his expression serious. "Are you really all right, Viv? Tell me honestly." Vivian met her brother's concerned gaze steadily. "I am better than all right, Samuel. For the first time in my life, I'm making my own decisions, building something that's mine." Ross has been nothing but respectful and supportive. "And there's nothing improper between you?" Vivian felt her cheeks warm. "No, nothing improper." Samuel studied her face for a moment longer, then sighed. "But you care for him." It wasn't a question, and Vivian didn't bother denying it. "Yes, I do." "Does he care for you?" I think so. We haven't spoken of it directly." Samuel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of their father that Vivian felt a pang of homesickness, despite everything. "This is a mess, Viv. Father's beside himself with grief, or so he claims. And Langley's been a terror, convinced someone spirited you away to spite him." "I left of my own free will," Vivian said firmly. "No one spirited me away. I refused to marry Langley, and Father cast me out. I nearly died in that storm before Ross found me." Samuel's expression softened. "I know, Viv. I was there, remember? I tried to talk sense into Father afterward, but he wouldn't listen. Then when you didn't return after a few days, he started saying you must have perished in the storm. I think he actually believes it now. It's easier for him than admitting he drove you away. And the others, Mary and Emma, the boys, they miss you something fierce. Emma cries at night when she thinks no one can hear. Mary keeps your photograph by her bed." Samuel hesitated, then added, "Mother's not been well. The shock, I think, and the guilt." Vivian closed her eyes briefly, pain lancing through her at the thought of her family's suffering. "I wanted to send word somehow, to let you know I was safe, but we were afraid of Langley's reaction if he found out." "Smart," Samuel conceded. "He's been in a foul mood, firing hands, threatening anyone who mentions your name. There's talk he might lose the ranch if things keep on as they are." "What do you mean?" Samuel lowered his voice, though there was no one to overhear them. Rumor has it he's overextended himself, borrowed heavily to expand his holdings, counting on your dowry, or rather, the land and water rights father promised as part of the marriage agreement to secure his position. Without that, he's vulnerable. Vivian absorbed this information with a mixture of surprise and vindication. So, her refusal had hurt Langley in more ways than just his pride. "Good," she said simply. Samuel grinned, a flash of the boy he had been before responsibilities had weighed him down. "That's my sister, still as stubborn as ever?" His expression grew serious again. "What now, Viv? Will you come home? Father might reconsider, especially if Langley's fortunes continue to decline." Vivian shook her head firmly. "No, Samuel, I'm not going back. Not to be bartered away in marriage, not to live under Father's thumb. I have a life here now, a purpose." She gestured toward the woods where Ross had disappeared. "A partner who respects me, values what I can contribute." Samuel studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand, but the others will want to know you're alive, Viv. It's cruel to let them believe otherwise." "You're right," Vivian acknowledged. "But I don't want Father or Langley knowing where I am, at least not yet." "I can be discreet," Samuel assured her. "Tell the young ones privately, swear them to secrecy. As for Mother—" He hesitated. "She deserves to know, Viv. She's been blaming herself." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. Despite her mother's failure to stand up to her father, she couldn't bear the thought of her suffering unnecessarily. "All right, tell Mother, but make sure she understands I'm safe and happy, and that it must remain a secret from Father and anyone who might report to Langley." Samuel nodded, relief evident in his features. "I will. And I'll visit when I can, bring news from home." Vivian smiled through her tears. "I'd like that." They talked a while longer, Samuel sharing updates on their siblings and the farm, Vivian explaining her new life and business venture with Ross. By the time Ross returned from the stable, the siblings had reached an understanding, and much of the tension had dissipated. "Mr. O'Malley," Samuel greeted him, extending his hand again. "I owe you an apology for my suspicions earlier, and my thanks for saving my sister's life." Ross shook the offered hand. "No apology necessary. I'd be suspicious too, in your position." "Samuel will be visiting occasionally," Vivian explained. "He's going to let our younger siblings and Mother know I'm safe, but discreetly." Ross nodded approvingly. "That seems wise. You're welcome here any time, Mr. Johnson." "Samuel, please," Vivian's brother insisted. "And I should be going before I'm missed at home. It's a long ride back." After Samuel departed, promising to return in 2 weeks with news from home, Vivian felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief that her family would know she was safe, happiness at reconnecting with her brother, but also a lingering sadness for the pain her disappearance had caused. Ross seemed to sense her conflicted feelings. "Are you all right?" he asked as they entered the cabin. Vivian nodded, moving to stoke the fire. "Yes, it was good to see Samuel, to know that I haven't been forgotten." "They could never forget you, Vivian," Ross said quietly. "You're not someone easily forgotten." She turned to face him, warmed by the simple sincerity in his voice. "Thank you for being so understanding with Samuel. He was just being protective." "As he should be," Ross agreed. "He's a good brother." They prepared dinner together as usual, but Vivian could sense a subtle change in the atmosphere between them. Samuel's visit had brought the outside world into their secluded existence, reminding them that there were consequences and complications beyond the boundaries of their private arrangement. As they ate, Ross seemed lost in thought, responding to Vivian's comments with distracted nods and brief answers. Finally, she set down her fork and asked directly, "What's troubling you, Ross?" He looked up, surprised by the direct question. "What makes you think something's troubling me? You've barely said 10 words since Samuel left, and you've been staring at your plate as if it holds the answers to life's great mysteries." A ghost of a smile touched Ross's lips. "That obvious, am I?" "To me, yes," Vivian replied simply. Ross was silent for a moment, then said carefully, "I've been thinking about what your brother said about your father believing you're dead, about Langley's anger. I'm concerned that once word gets out that you're alive and well, living here, you think they might cause trouble?" "I think Langley might," Ross admitted. Men like him don't take kindly to losing what they consider theirs. And while I don't know your father well, from what you've told me, he's not the type to admit he was wrong. Vivian considered this. What are you suggesting? That I should remain dead indefinitely? No, of course not. Just that we should be prepared for possible repercussions once your survival becomes known. Ross met her eyes directly. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'll stand by you. You have my word on that. The fierce protectiveness in his voice touched Vivian deeply. Thank you, Ross. That means more than I can say. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, the tension eased by the open acknowledgement of their concerns. As they cleared away the dishes, Ross casually mentioned, "Your cabin is nearly ready. Another day or two of work, and you could move in whenever you choose." Vivian nodded, though the prospect of leaving the warmth and companionship of Ross's cabin suddenly seemed less appealing than it once had. "Yes, I suppose I could." Ross glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "Unless you'd prefer to wait a bit longer. As I said before, the weather's still unpredictable." Was it her imagination, or did he sound hopeful that she might stay? Vivian found herself saying, "Perhaps it would be more sensible to wait until after Samuel's next visit. See what news he brings before making any changes." Relief flickered across Ross's face. "That seems wise." As they settled by the fire for their evening reading, Vivian found herself hyper-aware of Ross's proximity, of the deep timbre of his voice as he read from Middlemarch, of the way the firelight played across his strong features. Samuel's visit had changed something between them, making the unspoken attraction harder to ignore. When Ross closed the book for the night, their eyes met across the small space separating them. For a long moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with possibility. "Vivian," Ross began, his voice husky. But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a sudden gust of wind rattling the shutters, breaking the spell. Ross cleared his throat and stood, moving to bank the fire for the night. "We should get some rest," he said, his back to her. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." Vivian nodded, though he couldn't see her, and rose to prepare for bed. As she settled beneath the blankets on Ross's bed, listening to him arrange his pallet by the fire, she couldn't help wondering what he had been about to say before the wind interrupted them, and she couldn't help hoping that someday soon they would find the courage to speak openly of the feelings growing between them, feelings that were becoming increasingly difficult to disguise beneath the pretense of a simple business arrangement. The 2 weeks until Samuel's promised return passed in a blur of activity. Vivian's cabin was completed, furnished with basic necessities and made as comfortable as possible with the limited resources available. Ross taught her more about his trading business, introducing her to a Blackfeet hunter named Two Hawks, who occasionally traded with him, allowing her to practice the few words of the tribe's language Ross had taught her. Through it all, the unspoken attraction between them continued to grow, manifesting in lingering glances, casual touches that seemed to carry more meaning than either acknowledged, and conversations that sometimes trailed into charged silences. Yet neither took the step to bridge the gap between friendship and something more, each perhaps waiting for a sign from the other that the time was right. Samuel arrived as promised, bringing welcome news from home. The younger children now knew Vivian was alive and safe, their joy tempered only by the need for secrecy. Their mother, though still frail, had rallied upon learning her eldest daughter had survived, sending her love and a small package containing Vivian's favorite childhood book of poetry, and a handkerchief embroidered with violets, a peace offering of sorts. "She wanted to come herself," Samuel explained as Vivian unwrapped the treasured items, tears in her eyes. "But she's not strong enough for the journey, and it would raise too many questions." "I understand," Vivian assured him, pressing the handkerchief to her cheek. "Tell her I cherish these gifts and that I miss her." Samuel nodded, then hesitated before adding, "There's other news. Not so pleasant, I'm afraid." Ross, who had been giving the siblings privacy by busying himself with chores outside, entered at that moment. Seeing their serious expressions, he asked, "Is everything all right?" Samuel glanced at him, then back to Vivian. "Langley came to the house yesterday. He and Father had words, loud ones. I couldn't hear everything, but it seems Langley is blaming Father for your disappearance. Says Father should have handled you better, shouldn't have let you out of his sight." Vivian felt a chill at the possessiveness implied in those words. As if I were a wayward horse to be corralled. Exactly, Samuel agreed grimly. Father was furious. Told Langley he had no right to question how he raised his children. Langley left in a rage, but not before threatening to ruin Father financially if he didn't make things right. Ross had moved to stand near Vivian, not touching her, but close enough that she could draw strength from his presence. What did he mean by make things right? He asked. Samuel shrugged. Not entirely clear, but from what I gathered, Langley wants Father to uphold his end of whatever bargain they struck the water rights and grazing land that were to be part of Vivian's dowry. But that's absurd, Vivian protested. How can Father provide a dowry when there's no marriage, when the bride is presumed dead? I don't think Langley cares about the logic, Samuel said. He needs those rights to secure his position, and he's desperate enough to threaten Father to get them. Ross's expression had hardened. Has Langley said anything about suspecting Vivian might still be alive? Samuel shook his head. Not that I've heard. He seems convinced she either died in the storm or was spirited away by a rival. Either way, he blames Father for the loss. Good, Ross said decisively. Let's keep it that way, as long as possible. They talked a while longer. Samuel sharing more news from home and town, including the gossip that Langley's creditors were becoming increasingly impatient. When Samuel finally departed, promising to return in another 2 weeks, Vivian felt both comforted by the connection to her family and troubled by the news of Langley's desperation. You're worried, Ross observed as they watched Samuel ride away. Vivian nodded. Langley is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. If he's desperate enough to threaten my father openly, who knows what else he might do? Ross's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a reassuring weight. We'll be careful. Your cabin is ready whenever you feel it's time to move in, but there's no rush. You're safe here. Vivian turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed by gratitude for all he had done for her. I don't know how I can ever repay you for your kindness, Ross. You've given me so much: a home, a future, your protection. Ross's gray eyes were serious as they met hers. You don't need to repay me, Vivian. Having you here, working alongside me, it's been a gift I never expected to receive. The simple sincerity in his voice made Vivian's heart ache with emotions too complex to name. They stood there for a long moment. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. Ross, she began softly, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, but feeling that something needed to be acknowledged between them. But before she could continue, the sound of an approaching horse made them both turn. A rider was approaching from the direction of Silver Creek, not Samuel returning, but a stranger. Ross moved slightly in front of Vivian, his posture alert, but not overtly defensive. Were you expecting anyone else today? He asked quietly. Vivian shook her head, apprehension creeping up her spine. No. As the rider drew closer, Vivian could make out the gleam of a badge on his chest, Sheriff Davis from Silver Creek. Her heart sank. Had someone recognized her in town after all? Had word gotten back to Langley? Ross must have recognized the sheriff at the same moment, for he murmured, "Let me do the talking. Remember, you're Vivian Jenkins from Helena." Vivian nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself, as Sheriff Davis reined in his horse before them. "Afternoon, O'Malley," the sheriff greeted them, tipping his hat to Vivian. "Miss Jenkins?" "Sheriff," Ross acknowledged. "What brings you all the way out here?" Davis dismounted, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "Thought I'd have a word with you about that Johnson girl, the one who went missing during the big storm in February." Vivian fought to keep her expression neutral, grateful for the practice she'd had in controlling her reactions during years of living with her father's unpredictable temper. "What about her?" Ross asked, his tone casual. "Has there been news?" Davis studied them both before answering. "Interesting thing happened yesterday. Bartholomew Langley came into my office, offering a reward for information about her whereabouts. $500. Vivian couldn't quite suppress a small gasp. It was an enormous sum, more than most ranch hands made in a year. "That's a lot of money for information about a girl presumed dead," Ross observed, his voice carefully neutral. "Indeed it is," Davis agreed. "Makes a man wonder why Langley's so interested in finding her dead or alive." "Perhaps he was genuinely attached to her," Ross suggested. though his tone made clear how unlikely he found that possibility. The sheriff snorted. Langley's not attached to anything except his money and his land. No, there's something else driving him. He fixed Ross with a penetrating stare. Which brings me to why I'm here. Langley seems to think someone might have helped the girl disappear. Someone who traps or hunts in these parts. Vivian's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the sheriff must hear it. Ross, however, remained impassive. That so? Any particular reason he suspects a trapper? Claims one of his hands spotted a man matching your description near the Johnson property around the time the girl went missing. Davis's eyes moved to Vivian, then back to Ross. Thought I'd ask you directly if there's any truth to it. Ross met the sheriff's gaze steadily. I haven't been near the Johnson place in months, Sheriff. Been too busy establishing trading connections in Helena with Miss Jenkins here. He gestured toward Vivian. As for the missing girl, it's a tragic business, but I had nothing to do with it. Technically, Vivian realized, Ross wasn't lying. He hadn't been near her family's property. She had come to him, stumbling through the snow until he found her collapsed near his cabin. Sheriff Davis seemed to consider Ross's words carefully. I see, and you, Miss Jenkins, how long have you been partnering with O'Malley here? Vivian swallowed hard. Since early February, Sheriff. I came from Helena to discuss potential business opportunities. When the storm hit, I was forced to remain here longer than planned. Since then, we've formalized our arrangement. Davis nodded slowly. Interesting timing. Is there something specific you're accusing us of, Sheriff? Ross asked, a hint of steel entering his voice. Not accusing, just asking questions, Davis replied mildly. $500 is a powerful motivator for folks to start remembering things they might have forgotten. Thought I'd give you fair warning that people might be looking more closely at your business in the coming weeks. Ross nodded once. I appreciate the courtesy, Sheriff. But as I said, I had nothing to do with the Johnson girl's disappearance. Davis held Ross's gaze for a moment longer, then seemed to come to a decision. Well, I've said my piece. You two have a good day. He remounted his horse, then added casually, By the way, Miss Jenkins, that's a mighty fine handkerchief you're holding. Don't often see that particular shade of violet embroidery outside of the Johnson household. Thomas's wife is known for her skill with the needle. With that parting shot, he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Vivian frozen in place, the handkerchief her mother had sent still clutched in her hand. When the sheriff was out of earshot, Vivian turned to Ross, panic rising in her throat. He knows. He recognized the handkerchief. Ross's expression was grim. Maybe, or he's fishing, hoping for a reaction. What do we do now? Ross guided her back toward the cabin, his hand protective at the small of her back. We need to be prepared for the possibility that your identity may soon be revealed. Sheriff Davis strikes me as a reasonable man, but that reward money will have others looking more closely at us. Once inside, Ross paced the cabin floor, thinking aloud. If Langley learns you're alive and living here, he might try to force you to return to your father's house, to fulfill the marriage agreement. He has no legal right to do that, Vivian protested. I'm of age. I can choose where I live and whom I marry. The law doesn't always protect women as it should, Ross said grimly, especially when powerful men like Langley are involved. And if he can't force you legally, he might try other means. Vivian sank into a chair, the full implications of their situation washing over her. I won't go back, she said firmly. I won't marry him, no matter what he threatens. Ross stopped his pacing and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I know, and I won't let anyone force you to do anything against your will. I promise you that, Vivian. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. Ross squeezed her hands gently. I think it's time we accelerated our plans. The sooner we establish ourselves as legitimate business partners with connections beyond this valley, the harder it will be for Langley or your father to interfere. Vivian nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. What do you suggest? I have a contact in Helena, a merchant named Richardson, who deals in furs and other goods. I've been corresponding with him about setting up more formal trading arrangements. We could travel there next week, meet with him in person, perhaps secure contracts that would strengthen our position. That sounds sensible, Vivian agreed. But won't leaving make it seem like we're running away? Ross shook his head. Not if we tell people in Silver Creek exactly where we're going and why. We'll make it clear we're conducting legitimate business, not fleeing, Sheriff Davis included. The plan made sense, and Vivian found comfort in having a course of action. Still, anxiety gnawed at her. Do you think the sheriff will tell Langley about me? Ross considered this. Hard to say. Davis strikes me as a man who follows the law, but makes his own judgments about right and wrong. He might decide that a young woman choosing her own path is none of Langley's business, reward money or no. I hope you're right. Ross rose to his feet, still holding her hands. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this. Vivian? Looking up into his earnest gray eyes, Vivian felt a surge of affection so powerful it nearly took her breath away. I know, she said softly, and that makes all the difference. That night, as Vivian lay in Ross's bed, listening to the familiar sounds of him settling on his pallet by the fire, she found herself unable to sleep. The day's events had left her mind racing with possibilities, some hopeful, others terrifying. Ross, she called softly into the darkness. Are you awake? Yes, came his immediate reply. Can't sleep? No. I keep thinking about what might happen if Langley discovers I'm here. She heard Ross shift on his pallet. Try not to worry. We'll be prepared for whatever comes. Vivian hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her most. What if he tries to take me by force? What if he brings men with him? There was a long silence, then the sound of Ross sitting up. I won't let that happen, Vivian. But you're just one man. If he brings several, then we'll have to make sure we're not here when he comes, Ross said firmly, or that we have help of our own. Vivian considered this. Samuel might help us. And perhaps Two Hawks and his friends. Yes, Ross agreed. We're not without resources, but let's not borrow trouble. Sheriff Davis might keep his suspicions to himself, or Langley might decide you're not worth the effort. Vivian sighed. I doubt that. Not with his financial situation as precarious as Samuel described. Another silence fell between them, longer this time. Then Ross spoke, his voice different somehow, softer, more hesitant. Vivian, there's something I've been wanting to tell you, something I should have said before now. Vivian's heart quickened. What is it? She heard him move. And then he was kneeling beside the bed, a shadowy figure in the darkness. I care for you, he said simply. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. More than I thought I could care for someone again. Vivian reached out, finding his hand in the darkness and grasping it tightly. I care for you too, Ross. So much. His fingers tightened around hers. I want you to know that whatever happens with Langley, with your father, my feelings won't change. I'll stand by you, protect you if needed, but more than that, I'll respect your choices, support your independence. Tears pricked Vivian's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. Thank you, she whispered. That means everything to me. Ross lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. We should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be soon enough to make plans. As he moved to return to his pallet, Vivian found herself reluctant to let go of his hand. Ross, she said impulsively, stay, here, with me. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, she saw him freeze, uncertainty written in his posture. Vivian, I don't want you to think that I expect— I don't, she interrupted. I don't want to be alone tonight. Please. After a moment's hesitation, Ross nodded. Vivian moved over, making space for him on the narrow bed. He lay down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance even in the confined space. Vivian curled against his side, her head finding a natural resting place on his shoulder. Ross's arm came around her, holding her gently. Better, he murmured into her hair. Much better, Vivian confirmed, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, more comforting than she could have imagined. As sleep finally began to claim her, Vivian realized that despite the uncertainties facing them, she had never felt more secure, whatever challenges Langley or her father might present. She would face them with Ross at her side, and somehow that made all the difference.